The cost of doing business and winning a national championship: 1, 2, 3 coaches leaving Ohio State. And wouldn't you know it, that's the perfect number of things to talk about on a Thursday on the Podcast Daily. That's Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. And one of those positions, Berm, sounds like that's been filled for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I mean, it's 3 o'clock on Wednesday as we're recording this. I think transparency is important. Obviously, this isn't going to be public until 5 o'clock a.m. on Thursday. But to this juncture, nothing has been made official with Tyler Bowen, the offensive coordinator / quarterback coach at Virginia Tech, coming to Ohio State to be at minimum, the offensive line coach. But it does seem pretty strongly to be trending in that direction. And it would be a surprise at this point if that did not happen, right?
Yep. So we heard that name earlier, like that it was really trending in that direction on Wednesday for Ohio State. And thing number one is, what do you make of it? Because it felt like initially your view on this, Berm, and it'll be up to you to say if it's changed or not, was like Ohio State's got to go huge game hunting, big game hunting for the most well-known offensive line coaches in the sport. And that's not really what Tyler Bowen is, but I don't know. How do you view if this is the direction and he is coaching offensive line and in some form or fashion will be working alongside Brian Hartline, as we continue to believe he will be the offensive coordinator and play caller for the Buckeyes? What would be your thought about the way that this wrapped up with Bowen?
Well, I mean, again, Homer Berm was very, very clear that he wanted big name hunting. I thought guys like Joe Rudolph at Notre Dame or Matt Luke at Clemson probably should have had a call to say, like, to make them say no. But we are aware of Ryan Day's propensity for going after younger coaches, guys that have been able to do different things. And outside of the name here of Tyler Bowen, which is foreign or unknown to a lot of people, like if you look at the resume, it does suit up and does check a lot of the boxes of what I was looking for, especially if the presumption is that Brian Hartline is going to be at least the co-offensive coordinator for Ohio State and the presumptive play caller, because we talked earlier this week about wanting to have an offensive line coach / co-offensive coordinator that had some run game history. This is definitely someone that has that. Tyler Bowen played Big Ten football at Maryland. He was an offensive lineman there. He's coached pretty much since he got done playing, I think in 2010, where he started coaching as a student at Maryland because he was injured and finished his career there early. He's coached for James Franklin. He's coached for Joe Moorhead. Certainly a lot of different influences on him, but he's been an NFL coach for Urban Meyer. He's been a recruiting coordinator for Penn State, did a great job there, including bringing in guys like Olu Fashanu and Tyler Warren. Those were his players that he recruited. So clearly he has some chops there. Brent Pry, the Virginia Tech head coach, who was the defensive coordinator at Penn State with him, called him like their ace recruiter in the DMV, which is important for Ohio State, especially as we move potentially toward a Larry Johnson departure in a year or so, and that area of the country needing somebody to have some influence over it. So there's a lot of things that you really like here. He's 35 years old. He's called plays at Virginia Tech for the last 3 years. He's played offensive line in the Big Ten that Justin Fry did. There's a lot to like. And the only thing missing, I guess, is just that big name that everyone was looking for. And the guy you're going to hire him. And the lesser informed fans are going to be like, wow, that's a huge name. But if you see the reaction on Wednesday afternoon to the hire of Tyler Bowen, like, it's been pretty good from the people that are the football people around the country.
Yeah. And I think that, when that name was broached to me, I thought, well, I'm not sure that makes a ton of sense to me, because it had been 7 years since he was coaching directly with on the offensive line. As you mentioned, he was calling plays and working with quarterbacks at Virginia Tech. So on the one hand, I thought, well, that's a lengthy layoff. Not saying that he couldn't do it, go back to it. He played the position. I'm quite sure that he knows it as well, or better than anybody else, even if he didn't have day-to-day responsibility for it over the last 7 years. But I thought, looking at that list and what Ohio State was having replaced with Justin Fry, where the development was, well above average. I think that's my estimation, and I think a lot of people agree with that across college football during the playoff run and at the NFL level. Certainly the Arizona Cardinals do, which they also seemed to know what they were looking for in that regard. But either way, when we were talking about what Ohio State needed in terms of filling this position, I thought, well, probably not looking for someone to call plays. May well need someone with, some veteran savvy and a lot of years of experience to partner if this staff is skewing younger. And Tyler Bowen didn't necessarily accomplish that and hadn't been working with offensive linemen for a long time. Doesn't mean that I think more or less of the hire. It just didn't strike me right away as like, that's going to be the person Ohio State will hire.
Yeah, that is the confusing part, because obviously you're looking at somebody who can come in and be a developer and a recruiter. I think that right now, Bowen, at least as far as the offensive line goes, might have a leg up as a recruiter. But this is where it's important for Ryan Day, with the unlimited coaches that you get. Is Tim Drevno going to stick around and continue to work in a QC role and an analyst role? That would be helpful for someone like Tyler Bowen, who's been away from the offensive line for a few years, certainly. He's also, I'm sure, going to have the opportunity to bring in his own assistants, his own graduate assistant. And that is something that we'll see. But the guy has been coaching for 10 years. I mean, he's young, he's 35, but he's been coaching. He's been coaching for 15 years, according to Wikipedia, which obviously take that with a grain of salt. But he's, generally speaking, when it comes to biography stuff, it's pretty right on. So this is a guy who's been coaching more than half of his life, almost. So it definitely has experience, maybe not what we expected, but it's another sign for Ohio State of how powerful the brand is, that a Power 4 offensive coordinator is willing to take a step back. And, we think maybe he'll play a role as a co-offensive coordinator with Brian Hartline and a run game coordinator, but when it all shakes out. But either way, the fact is this guy was willing to take a step back from being a Power 4 coordinator to be a position coach at Ohio State. Because the brand of the Buckeyes is so strong. And, from a recruiting perspective, that's where it's going to get interesting. I've asked around the state already on Wednesday afternoon, guys like Max Riley, guys like Sam Greer, et cetera, how comfortable they are with this. Do they know Tyler Bowen at all? The answer is nope, never heard of him. Don't know the guy at all, which feels like a touch of a risk if you're Ohio State, but you can't just play for the short term here. So you have to go out and find someone. And I'm confident Ryan Day believes that Tyler Bowen is going to quickly make up ground and familiarize himself with those players. And when that happens, it'll be 3 weeks from now, and nobody will have batted an eye and wondered why hire a guy that hadn't coached the offensive line in 7 years.
Yeah, and it does get a little bit into the weeds when you start talking about quality control and assistant offensive line coaches and that stuff. But, at the highest level, national championship teams, in Ohio State is one of them now and has been competing at that level for quite some time. You're going to keep expanding the staff, and those guys they take on an outsized role and an outsized influence because they're allowed to be on the field in a way that was sort of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. You can't do this. But Ohio State has the ability to bring in a bunch of those people. Now, whether that would still be Tim Drevno, who I think has interest outside of Ohio State. As of 5 days ago, it didn't sound like he was likely to return. I don't have an update on him specifically, but whether it is someone like Drevno or potentially, I think if I'm going back to like dream fantasy drafting the staff, like Kevin Wilson then becomes an option. Can you pay X amount of dollars if you still, he just had a deal where he was a head coach and was being paid pretty well? How much would it take to get Kevin Wilson to do a quality control job that would both help the offensive line, potentially help the tight ends, and potentially help Brian Hartline and Ryan Day, given their familiarity working together and understanding the system? So I'm not placing down a marker or a prediction on that, because there could be other people who fit that profile as well. I would say that Kevin Wilson or Tim Drevno would make the most sense for that. Yeah. But that would then alleviate, I guess, some of the concern, if that's your view, or some of the risk, if that's your view, of going with the younger hire here in Tyler Bowen, because you are looking at, if Billy Fessler is promoted the way that we expect to take the quarterback's job, you have Brian Hartline coordinating, you have Keenan Bailey, and now Tyler Bowen here. Carlos Locklin is I guess he's the elder statesman of that room, but he's only been at Ohio State for a year. So that some gravitas may well be needed, but that could be how you find it.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of this current setup is Ohio State can hire the younger, more dynamic, more personable types to be the recruiters on the primary staff of 10 or 11 with Ryan Day, and then you have the ability to go out and bring in other guys. if we're talking dream scenarios, who you go out and get, I call like Tennessee State and I ask Mike Brewster down there, who's the tight ends coach, and say, hey, do you want to come be the assistant offensive line coach at Ohio State? It's a guy who obviously played at Ohio State, been around and knows the system. And then you can find young guys to continue building up, because what we saw with Justin Fry is in 3 years from now, the likelihood of Tyler Bowen still being at Ohio State is pretty low. So now you got to start positioning yourself for the future. And you can almost have like a scout team of coaches with the way things are currently set up now. And I think Ohio State's in a position to do that, whether it's Kevin Wilson or somebody else that's more experienced. We've seen the value of guys like Todd Fitch at Ohio State, of obviously having Tim Drevno there this year. We've seen that happen, and I don't think that's going to slow down. So it does make sense to find somebody more in the QC analyst role that is perhaps a bit more veteran, and somebody who can just focus on schematics and game day stuff, and let these younger guys go out and be the face of your program as recruiters, because that is what matters. That recruiting is still the lifeblood of college football. And so if you look at a guy like Tyler Bowen, the first thing that catches your eye is he's a recruiter. So now but he's a recruiter with a lot of experience doing a lot of different things.
Yeah. And to wrap that up, Berm, I mean, Ohio State, the way that they structured the staff in specific to the offensive line, they did both last year. They had a veteran in Tim Drevno, and they had an up and coming GA position with Mike Salini, who then got another job at UNLV. So they had 3 people helping manage that room. So one way or another, like I don't think that the room itself has been finalized for the Ohio State offensive line, but it'll be fascinating to see how that works now, with that being the direction officially at the top with Tyler Bowen.
Well, as you said, I mean, it's 3:12 on Wednesday afternoon. Nothing's been official. Nothing's been finalized. So there's a lot to happen between now and by the time spring ball starts. There's probably, Ohio State has assistants and GAs to replace on defense, guys that left with Jim Knowles. They've got GAs and assistants to replace on offense. Like, there's a whole support staff coming in, recruiting, everything. So there's a lot of work to still happen before Ohio State's ready for spring football with a full complement. Yeah,
you're right, which is also a benefit of moving it back to after spring break for Ohio State this year. All right. On the way there, though, thing number 2, you were not with Bill Landis and me on Wednesday to talk about some guys who could make the most out of winter workouts. Who would you have named?
I know that you talked about Jalen McClain. He's one. I think the other safety is Malik Hartford. And if you're looking at a player to replace Lathan Ransom, because Ohio State has to replace Jordan Hancock and Lathan Ransom, and the defense is still ostensibly going to be the same style of defense if things happen as we expect, which is Matt Guerrieri will be one of the co-defense coordinators, and we still expect Tim Walton to be the other. So the Ohio State defense, you have Lorenzo Styles, who played some in that spot, but he was really more of a dime defensive back for Ohio State this year. And I'm not sure if he's ready to be the guy to fit that role that Jordan Hancock or Lathan Ransom's leaving, because he doesn't really fit physicality wise to replace either one of them. But I think Malik Hartford does. And I think Jalen McClain's flexibility allows him to maybe be the guy that can play in the slot. He's a little twitchier. You need a bruiser. You need somebody to come downhill and play the box, because I think maybe you need Caleb Downs to play more of the center field role this year, because you don't have the experience around him. So Malik Hartford's one to me that really steps up. He was on the way there 2 years ago, had a little bit of a slump in the middle of the season, then missed most of the spring last year with an injury, and that allowed the door to open for Jalen McClain. But I think Malik is in a position to really make some hay. And another guy that I think we're not going to talk about a lot, because Jermaine Matthews returned, because Davis Enigminosa returns, because of the arrival of Devin Sanchez, is Aaron Scott. Aaron Scott is physically everything you want at corner. He's not going to get talked about a lot in this next couple weeks and months, because people are going to be waiting to see where Devin Sanchez ascends and how fast he moves up the list. But Aaron is a guy who really could use a big spring, and he did a nice job last year. The coaches raved about him and his development and his improvement and his maturity growth from the time he arrived on campus to the time that the season ended. So on defense, those are 2 guys for me. I could name a couple on offense, but to me, the most important one is clearly the quarterback. I mean, whoever it is. I think that the battle between Julian Sain and Lincoln Kienholz is going to be really fun to watch. And I think both of them have areas they need to make significant strides. But it'll be fun to watch the impact where Ryan Day can maybe spend more time with them this spring than he did last spring because he was coaching running backs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's Bill and I talked about Julian Sayin and Lincoln Keenholz, and to some extent Tavian St. Clair, although, expecting him to play a great deal as a true freshman is a lot and probably not very realistic, and also not what you want if you're Ohio State necessarily. So we went there and we talked about the offensive linemen. Like, you could pick any number. Luke Montgomery was where I went. Would there be any other spot that you think bears monitoring? I guess you and I have mentioned Mylan Graham in like the second half of the year, and like he was still going on the road and traveling with the team a lot. I'm very fascinated to see what, he was already out there on the Monarch by himself throughout bowl practice, getting in the extra work. I wonder what it could look like if he gets some of that extra time, because he was missing that a year ago.
Yeah, and this is where, full on Homer Berm. I'm not going to talk about guys like Mylan Graham that people are going to want to try to steal after spring ball. So we're not going to talk about him till the fall hits. We're just going to leave him as an obscure name to know amongst the truly dedicated fans. I do think that there's a real opportunity here for Ian Moore to step up. If we're talking about the offensive line, yes, you have the presumptive starters in Ethan Anianwa and Philip Daniels. Then what at tackle? So Ian Moore has to be able to emerge and put himself in the position to be not just a competitor for the starting spot at left or right tackle, but someone that Ohio State can count on in the event that they need a third. As they still need a fourth somewhere, but I think that because I don't think that the Armstrong twins are anywhere near ready to take that sort of ascension. They're great kids and working hard, but they're still a year away. And you'd really rather not have to keep moving Luke Montgomery or Tegra Shabola back outside in the event that something weird happens with the others. So if I'm talking offensively, the one guy who I think has to have the biggest spring and has an opportunity to really move himself around in the conversation, it's Ian Moore, because he's been overlooked in his recruitment because he's from Indiana and everyone just assumes that's Ohio West. And it doesn't matter if you recruit from Indiana or whatever, but he's a really good player, top 30 player, according to some folks at that time. And the opportunity for Ian is right there in front of him. And he looks more and more like an offensive tackle every time you see him. And I wonder, just given the opportunity to go into spring with a clean slate, no advantage for Anianwa or Philip Daniels as far as the playbook goes or anything like that, does Ian Moore have the ability to usurp one of them? And I think he does. Now, whether or not he has the consistency to do it, that'll be the big question. But on offense, the tackle situation is and has been and continues to be the one area where you're like, man, somebody else has to step up there. And he's definitely that guy in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, whether he wins a starting job outright or just pushes for it, I mean,
he has to prove that he can be a starter.
Yeah, the second part of that is more meaningful than the first part. If he won a starting job, well, you'd say, wow, that's pretty remarkable and incredible. Good for him, because both of these other guys have started football games, maybe not at the absolute highest level, Big Ten level for one, and, Rice for the other. But, that they have an edge in experience and snaps and blocking other competitive humans. So if he does that, great. But if he needs to at least be in the same conversation with them, given what we saw happen to Ohio State last year, once the first wave went down and Zen Michalski wasn't quite ready, even before the unfortunate injury. And then you were like, well, what do you do there? And you had to move Donovan Jackson. Like, that could still happen with a guy like Tegra Shabola, but that's not, you don't want to be working on plan C or thinking about plan D in spring ball. You'd rather be seeing these guys that you recruited and are developing and ready to take the next step when their moment comes. And I don't know if that is March for Ian Moore, but it'd be helpful if by April you had a pretty good feel for it.
Yeah, because if you look beyond Ian Moore as the 3/1C offensive tackle, it is pretty bare. There's a real opportunity even for incoming freshman Carter Lowe to make a difference there and to get into the two deep. I think that Javon McFadden, another incoming freshman, might be physically ready and has the right mindset to push. They've called him like a swing guy, but I think he's a guard. But he has sort of the Donovan Jackson type of athleticism where if you just put him out there, you can let him block dudes. He's really, really good at it. But he's super mean and he might rip people's head off. And so I'm not sure as a freshman that like you want that sort of volatility on the offensive line, but he's he's got all the tools, but you certainly don't want to be heading into the spring or out of spring thinking, hey, we've got 2 offensive tackles and that's it. So whatever happens there, that's the most important spot to me.
All right. Thing number 3 was that Wednesday was the traditional National Signing Day. Are you sad, Berm, that there's really nothing for Ohio State to do on the first Wednesday in February anymore?
I don't know if I'm sad. It's certainly, you're getting used to it. It's nice to have everything done in December. It's weird. I've reached out to a couple people on Wednesday morning just to check on things. They're like, oh, we're on vacation. Like, holy moly, Ohio State's on vacation on signing day. Like, so it's definitely unusual, but I think it's best for the game when you can have your entire recruiting class signed and not just signed, but in most cases enrolled by the time that the playoff ends. I think that's better for the program. I still think that we need to look into having like a August 1st and a November 1st signing periods instead of in December, but that comes down the road, I guess, as they continue to tweak things. But it is weird. Ohio State signed nobody else on signing day to a scholarship. Jaston Gwynn, who is, a former Ohio State player, his son is signed on Wednesday as a preferred walk-on. It's a really talented player from Columbus. And other than that, you look at a team that was pretty much done once they went out and signed 5 guys in the transfer portal. So it's weird. I don't know that I like it, but I also feel like this is the way it is. And the coaches certainly like it better to not have to add another 2 months of concern and worry about who you're flipping, who's flipping away, who you need to go out and recruit. So the only one guy Ohio State was even considering was an offensive lineman named Philip Bowser from Youngstown Ursuline. He ended up signing with West Virginia because they were offering him some NIL opportunities there that Ohio State was not going to do for a preferred walk-on at that point. So that is what it is. And you hope that the schools, and Ohio State certainly is finding ways to be productive and make the most of this time instead of worrying about who's flipping to who.
Yeah, they can worry about losing guys again in April once spring ball is over and the portal kicks back open and everyone hits the panic button once again. But that's a conversation for another day. You don't have to worry about that at all. Roster's in good shape, and it seems like the coaching staff is falling into place for Ryan Day as well. We'll keep an eye on the rest of those pieces falling into place in the days ahead on the Podcast Daily. But that's what we've got for now on a 3 Things Thursday. For Jeremy Birmingham, I am Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us on the Podcast Daily. We'll talk to you tomorrow.